I get it, you scrolling through a sea of camera specs, wondering if that pricey full-frame rig will actually make a difference in the footage you already capture on a phone or a mid-range mirrorless. You've probably already asked yourself whether the investment will pay off on a weekend wedding shoot, a low-light music gig, or a travel vlog where you can't lug around a ton of gear. That hesitation is real, and before you click Add to Cart, I want to walk you through the Blackmagic design Pyxis 6K PL and see if it truly fits the kind of work you do. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the Pyxis isn't trying to be a beginner's point-and-shoot. It's positioned as a full-frame, 6K cinema camera, which immediately tells you it's built for creators who need that extra resolution and dynamic range for professional post-production work. If you're still shooting 1080p with a DSLR and you've outgrown the resolution ceiling, the Pyxis opens up a lot of doors. But that also means you need a workflow that can actually handle 6K files. DaVinci Resolve Studio is baked in, which is a huge plus if you already edit in Resolve, because the camera writes directly into a format Resolve can ingest without transcoding. For a colorist or a filmmaker who spends most of the day in the Fusion and Fairlight pages, that integration saves hours of conversion time. One of the biggest questions people have about Blackmagic's cinema line is autofocus. The Pyxis uses a contrast detect AF system that's decent for static subjects, but it doesn't have the predictive tracking you find in many mirrorless options from Sony or Canon. In practice, I've seen it lock onto a talking head in a well-lit interview within a second, but once the subject starts moving across the frame, you'll have to manually pull focus or rely on a focus puller. If you're planning a run-and-gun documentary style where you're constantly chasing subjects, you might find the autofocus a bit limiting. On the other hand, for controlled narrative shoots where you can pre-focus or use follow-focus gear, the lack of sophisticated AF isn't a deal-breaker. Low-light performance is where the dual native ISO really shines. Blackmagic set the base ISO at 400 and the second native ISO at 3200, which means the sensor can switch between two optimal gain curves without the noise spikes you usually see when you boost ISO on a single native sensor. In a test I did at an indie concert, the camera held clean detail at ISO 2500 while the stage lights were flickering, and the shadows stayed usable without needing heavy lift in post. If you often shoot gigs, night scenes, or candlelit interiors, that dual native ISO is a practical advantage you'll notice immediately. Stabilization is another practical concern. The Pyxis does not have in-body image stabilization, IBIS, so you'll need to rely on lenses with optical stabilization, gimbals, or steady rigs. For many cinema setups, crews already use a shoulder rig or a small dolly, so the lack of IBIS isn't a surprise. However, if you were hoping to shoot handheld run-and-gun footage with just the camera in your hand, you'll have to budget for a gimbal or accept some shakiness. That's a cost factor to keep in mind when comparing the total package price. Lens ecosystem is where the Pyxis makes a strategic move by using the PL mount. That opens up a huge world of cinema lenses: Cooke, Zeiss, Sigma Cine, and even older anamorphic glass if you already own or plan to rent them. The trade-off is that PL lenses are bulkier and more expensive than typical DSLR or mirrorless glass. If you're a filmmaker who already has a collection of PL lenses, the Pyxis slots right in. If you're coming from a Sony A-series background and only own mount lenses, you'll need adapters, which can add a layer of complexity and sometimes affect autofocus performance. So the decision here hinges on what glass you already have or are willing to invest in. Menu navigation on Blackmagic cameras is famously minimalist. The Pyxis sticks to a touchscreen and a few physical buttons, with a workflow that mirrors DaVinci Resolve's layout. That means if you spend hours in Resolve, you'll find the camera's menus intuitive, no deep nested submenus to get lost in. However, there's a learning curve for anyone who's never used a Blackmagic camera before. The touchscreen is responsive, but it can be a bit finicky with gloves on a cold set, So you might want a small external monitor if you're shooting in winter conditions. Battery confidence is something I always ask about because nobody wants to run out of juice in the middle of a take. The Pyxis uses a standard Vount battery, which is common in the cinema world. Those batteries give you roughly 90 minutes of shooting at 6K 24 frames per second, depending on whether you're also streaming. The camera's power consumption goes up noticeably when you enable the built-in streaming feature RTMP. Streaming directly from the camera is a neat capability for live events. But you'll need a